25 of the best albums from 25 of the best bands from the 1970s. I did a 1980s version of this video that you can watch right here, or better yet, finish watching this video and click on the video that pops up at the end. Again, this was a tough task. There are just too many great bands and albums from the 1970s to not leave off some great ones when you're trying to squeeze an entire decade into 25 albums, but here's 25 of my favorite for your consumption. Hey, what's up? I'm Jason, and this channel is for vinyl lovers who want to find something new to listen to, purchase, or avoid. I focus on vinyl, but everyone is welcome. Let's jump right in. So quickly, before we jump right in, I have to tell you that I am going live with a special guest this Friday, August 4th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm considering this an alpha pilot just to make sure all the technologies are working and we can provide a super fun, super engaging stream for you. We'll be pontificating on some interesting topics, and we'll even give away a record or two. Be ready to get involved, or just sit and lurk, whatever your thing is. I hope to see you there. All right, now let's jump right in. So we're about to kick off the 1970s super strong, but I have to confess that I had to cheat once while compiling this list. I'm trying to do each decade where I choose 25 albums by 25 artists and at least one from each year of the decade. I just couldn't work that out for the 1970s, so I had to cheat and pick one artist twice so I could cover all the years, but they're both fantastic albums, so I hope you're not too disappointed. All right, 1970, and we have the man himself, Jimi Hendrix, with his album Band of Gypsies. This is really the only live Hendrix we got during his lifetime, and yes, it's not with the Experience, but it is a hidden gem with some incredible Hendrix guitar. The tracks really speak to the times and where Hendrix was beginning to go with his music. It's a crime that it ended just as it was getting started. Next up, a phenomenal album by one of my favorite jazz musicians and composers. This is San Francisco by Bobby Hutcherson, featuring the awesome talents of tenor Harold Land. It includes one of the most beautiful compositions you will ever hear called Procession. It's simple and introspective. I'm just saying, if you haven't heard it, you absolutely must check it out. You can thank me later. All right, 1971 begins with a band some people would call the greatest rock and roll band of all time. It's hard to argue with you. Released in March, this is Sticky Fingers by the Rolling Stones. When I was like 5 years old, I remember my parents had the 45 single of Brown Sugar with Bitch on the B-side. And when I discovered that, I was like, isn't this a bad word? And putting my parents in a pretty precarious situation, trying to explain their way out of that one. They were basically like, well, technically no. So I took it upon myself to spend the next 4 hours saying nothing but the word bitch until they finally had enough and they shut it down. But I still remember that. You also get Wild Horses and probably my favorite rocker on this album, Can't You Hear Me Knockin'? So this is probably a lesser known album by the Beach Boys called Surf's Up. And while I love this fantastic cover painting, it's as if someone at the record label mixed up the album cover with the title. Never have two things not gone together more. But this is a really cool album. The one thing I'll say is that apparently Brian Wilson didn't contribute to this album as much as most of their prior albums, and it might be the album that's least like their other stuff, but it's still a really interesting album and includes some more bluesy and almost psychedelic tunes compared to their other albums. And wrapping up 1971 with another iconic band, this is Pink Floyd's Metal. To be honest, I'm not a massive Pink Floyd fan, but I just love the tune Echoes, which takes up all of side B. It is a rocking trip through psychedelia, and about 7 minutes into that song, they settle into a killer groove that is just so damn cool. I love it. This list is very late 70s heavy. In fact, over half my albums are from 1978 and 79, so we're stepping into a little bit of a wasteland here, heading into the mid-70s, at least for my collection, but I still have some great albums to show you. In 1972, there's only one album, and it's one of my favorites of all time, The Grateful Dead's Europe 72. If you're into the Dead and haven't already seen it, there's a great Amazon Prime series called Long Strange Trip. Of course it is. That came out in 2017, where a recording engineer talks about being on this tour, and he tells a great story that I don't want to give it away about one of the songs that made it onto this album. It's a great story, and this is a great album. All right, kicking off 1973, and this is a fantastic album, Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, another contender for greatest rock and roll band. This is probably my favorite overall Zeppelin album. It's just one great tune after another. I particularly love Dancing Days, The Song Remains the Same, The Rain Song, No Quarter, and Ocean. It's just so great. I have to listen to this album right now. Please excuse me. Okay, I'm back. And continuing 1973, we have a record that I had no idea about until someone else on YouTube showed it off. I wish I could remember who it was, so I could give them credit, but I just cannot remember. But this is Nectar with their 1974 album, Remember the Future. It's one track per side, and I can only describe it as funky, psychedelic rock, sort of like if Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull had a kid, but that's not even really doing it justice. There's some really nice harmonies, particularly on side 2. This is just a very cool record to settle into your coziest chair and chill out to. This album right here might be my favorite Zappa studio album. No, it's not. I don't know. I don't think I have a favorite. I mean, there's just too many to pick from, but this is his most successful album. If you've ever heard the phrase, "Don't eat the yellow snow," that's from this album. This is sort of a concept album, at least on side A, and it has some killer tunes on it, including Cosmic Debris, Apostrophe, and Uncle Remus. And of course, Zappa plays guitar and bass in his own signature shredding way. All right, 1975, and again, this is where I had to deviate from my own rules a little bit. Again, we have Frank Zappa, this time with One Size Fits All. This album is so great. It kicks off with Inca Roads, which is just a classic, iconic Zappa tune with one of his best guitar solos. It's got the social commentary mixed with the incredible compositions and playing. Early to mid 70s Zappa is my favorite, and this album does not disappoint. Kiss's Destroyer. This is the one with their classic tune Detroit Rock City, and whatever you think of Kiss, they always blow the roof off, and this album is no exception. I would say this is one of their best albums with some classic Kiss staples. All right, 1977, and you guessed it, just one album for that year. That's about to change, but first we have Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, an album that is a cliche to some, a masterpiece to others. I happen to fall into the latter group. Just a great album with a ton of great songs. My favorite is I Don't Want to Know, just some sweet vocal harmonies by Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, and a killer guitar solo to play the song out. One of my favorite songs of all time. All right, it's 1978 and I still have like 13 albums to get through. Some of my favorite albums are from this period. First off, we got Muddy Waters with I'm Ready. This is the second of Muddy's Johnny Winter produced albums from the Blue Sky record label, and this album took a Grammy Award in 1978. Johnny Winter plays a ton of guitar on this album, and it's just a raucous. You like that raucous? How about rip snorting good time of an album? It's about as electric blues as you can get. Just a killer blues masterpiece. And next we have Journey with Infinity. This is just one of those albums that's precious to me because it's a record that my mother would play often when I was just a youngin'. You know, you have those albums that are just beyond criticism. They're just part of your DNA. Well, this is one of those albums for me. Steve Perry and Neil Schon are at the peak of their powers on Infinity, and for me, the Perry-Schon duo is right up there with the Eddie Van Halen-David Lee Roth duo. They are just constantly attempting to outdo each other, and in my opinion, it makes for some of the best music ever recorded. And speak of the devil, here's Van Halen's self-titled debut album. What a kick-ass debut album. One of the best in rock and roll history, I think. These guys hit the ground running with this album. No warming up in the bullpen or nothing. Just wall-to-wall greatness from Running with the Devil to Eruption to Ain't Talking About Love, and that's just side A. Okay, next up is Heat Wave with Central Heating. This is Funk Star Deluxe. I mean, not Funk Star Deluxe, but Funk Star Deluxe, as in the only way I can describe this album. You know the tune The Groove Line? If you don't, go look it up. It's just killer funk. This album opens with another funky tune called Put the Word Out. This is just steam-rolling disco and saying, nah, the future is funk. This band had their debut in 1978 at Susie and the Banshees with their debut album, The Scream. Right from the jump, Susie identified herself as the queen of post-punk. Unlike some bands where it took them a time or two to figure out what they were doing, there's just some killer tunes on this album. Jigsaw Feeling, Overground, Helter Skelter, Hong Kong Garden, just too many to mention. If you haven't heard the Banshees, think Velvet Underground meets Iggy and the Stooges meets I don't even know what. All right, it's 1979, and although we are at the end of a decade, we still have a ton of great albums to cover, including this one, The Cure and Boys Don't Cry, along with Three Imaginary Boys. Three Imaginary Boys came out first in the UK, but when it was issued in the US, Canada, and Australia, it was known as Boys Don't Cry with a different track listing and as a compilation. It's a little confusing, but you really need both of these albums to hear all of The Cure's early tunes. Unlike Susie, I would say that The Cure would never really sound like this again. This is about as raw as the band would ever sound, and while I think they would go on to do bigger and better things, I do still really like these albums. Devo's Duty Now for the Future. I love all of Devo's albums. Well, almost all of them, but I just think this album is awesome. I guess anyone can read the articles and say, well, the band hated this album because the producer wanted this and the band wanted that. I mean, at the time, this was just Devo's second album and we loved it. And in some ways, artists are their own worst critics. So I'm judging this by what my ears say, and my ears say this album is super cool. You get Clock Out, Blockhead, Strange Pursuit, Pink Pussycat, Smart Patrol, Mr. DNA. I just think this is a well-conceived album with a ton of energetic tunes. I hardly need to introduce this album, Michael Jackson's Off the Wall. Some folks would say this is his best album. I still think Thriller edges it out, if barely, but in my opinion, this is about as good as disco ever got. It's a close tie with my next album. But this Quincy Jones produced album is just packed with head-bopping dance music. In fact, the only thing that keeps this from being a perfect album is the song She's Out of My Life, which is just too slow and sentimental for such an energetic album. That's just my opinion. My favorite tune is Burn This Disco Out, but you could pick any song on this album and I would not be mad at you. Except She's Out of My Life. All right, next up is an album that needs to be on your 70s disco radar. It's Donna Summer's On the Radio. This is a double LP compilation done right. They sequence these tunes in such a way to make each side a non-stop dance party. Donna Summer does not get enough credit as one of the great vocalists that we ever had. I think it's side 3 on here where you get Hot Stuff, Into Bad Girls, Into Dim All the Lights, Into Sunset People, and you will not be able to sit down. I guarantee it. Okay, Adam Ant is showing up again. He was on my 80s list, and this time on his debut, Dirk Wears White Socks. Again, Adam would never quite sound the same, and that's not good or bad. I happen to love his next few albums, but a lot of people would put this one on top because he's still got both feet planted firmly in punk. This is another one where the UK and US albums are very different. This is the UK pressing, and each one has its strengths. Adam Ant is a little bit polarizing, only in the sense that there's no one else quite like him, and this album might be a great place to start for most people. Next up, the B-52s with their self-titled debut, or in Germany it's called Play Loud. As you can see from that label. This is classic B-52s. Not necessarily my favorite of their albums, and that's not a criticism. I happen to think the B-52s have a handful of very, very good albums. My favorites on here are 52 Girls and Hero Worship. The B-52s had some incredibly catchy original tunes, and I would put their vocal talents up against anyone. I think it was Maurice White from Earth, Wind & Fire that said, "Never let the lyric get in the way of the groove." And that's always stuck in my head, and the B-52s certainly prioritized the groove. Another album squeaking into 1979, Chic's Greatest Hits compilation. Good Times is one of my favorite all-time songs, and you get an 8-minute version of it here. Another thing that maybe a lot of people don't know is that Nile Rodgers from Chic was an incredible songwriter who's responsible for collaborating with a ton of other artists on a ton of other hits. Madonna's Like a Virgin, Sister Sledge, We Are Family, Daft Punk, Get Lucky, Diana Ross, I'm Coming Out, David Bowie, Let's Dance. You want me to keep going? Oh, I can keep going. The B-52s, Rome, Duran Duran's Notorious. I'm sure the list just goes on and on, but that's all I can remember. Okay, you made it to the end. This is the last one on my list, and let's finish strong with the man himself, Prince Rogers Nelson. We all know him as the late, great Prince. I can't believe it's been 7 years since he passed. So sad. If you were fortunate enough to see Prince live, you know just how great he was. I got to see him in San Jose, California for his Welcome to America tour, and there's just no words to describe it. Just a 10 out of 10. Well, this is 70s Prince, 1979, when he was just starting to do his thing. This is his self-titled second album, and I just love it. Prince performed all the instruments here. I mean, he was just a beast. Highlights for me are I Want to Be Your Lover, Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad, and I Feel For You, made famous by Chaka Khan a few years later. In fact, she named her whole album I Feel For You. Prince is another one that wrote a lot of tunes for a lot of other artists, but that's a story for another video. Thanks so much for joining me on this trip down memory lane. I guess I have to do the 60s next. This is gonna start getting difficult. I might just have to do my favorite 25. Stop putting all these dumb rules on these decade videos. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. Do not forget, I'm going live this Friday, August 4th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.